Okay, we're ready to get underway. Thank you all for joining us today. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you for joining us today for two talks on the theme of preserving born digital art and media, new approaches and strategies. My name is Heather Dean, and I am the chair of the section on Archives of Literature and Art with the International Council on Archives, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's event. I'm joining you today from Victoria, British Columbia, excuse me, in Canada, where it's early in the morning and I am still having my coffee. And I'd like to open by acknowledging the traditional territories where I'm located. So I respectfully acknowledge the Lekwungen, the Songhees and Gosapsan peoples on whose territories I live, and the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And I can see that others are putting the lands and the territories in where they're joining from into the chat, and others are welcome to do so too. So before we get started, I'd like to go over a few housekeeping items so that you know how to participate in today's event. So we will have time for questions after we hear from both speakers. And you're welcome to submit your questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the control panel. While we'll do questions after we hear from both speakers, you're always welcome to put questions into the Q&A box as we proceed. You also have the option to select closed captions in the language of your choice, which you can select at the bottom of your screen. And this also to note that this session will be recorded and available on the ICA YouTube channel. As mentioned, today's event is hosted by the section on Archives of Literature and Art. And the purpose of this section is to communicate the cultural value of literary and artistic archives and to create a worldwide network of archivists, curators, and researchers. So we'll send a link around that has more information about the section on Archives of Literature and Art. In addition, we invite you to join us, which you can do as a member of the International Council on Archives, and there are more details in the chat. So today we have the immense privilege of hearing from Jeremy Heil and John Durno. And we'll start with Jeremy Heil. So Jeremy has been the digital and private records archivist at Queen's University Archives in Canada since 2001. He has taught workshops on digital records and metadata in archives and presented papers on various topics related to digital archives over the past 20 years. He has served on numerous committees locally, provincially, and nationally, including terms as the president of the Archives Association of Ontario and as managing editor of the Association of Canadian Archivists journal Archivaria. He serves as the emulator developer for the Canadian Council of Archives Cultivate grant-funded Futures of Digital Media Art Histories. Welcome, Jeremy, and I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Heather. I will get my screen sharing set up here. Hopefully everyone can see this. Here we go. So first, I would very much like to thank Heather, Clémence, and the ICA SLA for arranging this session. I am very happy to be sitting alongside John in this, and much looking forward to his own presentation, as it's a spectacular project. So I too would like to begin with a land acknowledgement of my own. I'm speaking to you from Queen's University, which is situated on the traditional and unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee and the Anishinaabe. I engage in this recognition not as some rote exercise, but rather in acknowledgement that my ancestors, and my progeny's activities have an impact on the land and the people. And I hope that from me onward, at a minimum, that we continue to respect all that has been entrusted to us and honor the treaties in both letter and spirit. So to situate this presentation, I would like to start with a quote from our project's introductory page. Across Canada, the first decades of digital art and media production saw a flourishing of projects by artists and activists from diverse communities: Indigenous, racialized, feminist, queer, diasporic. These artists and activists imagined alternate futures for the internet, spaces for Indigenous communities, and more. Hence, the heritage that we are losing is that which connects us both to communities neglected by traditional art and media, histories and institutions to the futures they imagined during the transformational period in the history of technology. So while what I am presenting today will certainly address these topics, I will largely be focusing this talk on how we are recovering some of these lost works. So to begin, the work that we've been doing has focused entirely on the art of Cheryl Lee Rondell. She has roots from Papaschase First Nation in Alberta and identifies as Cree half-breed with German and Polish ancestry. She is an interdisciplinary artist, singer, songwriter, and critical thinker, and in her words, her work, quote, investigates and attempts to articulate the dynamism of Nehiyawan, or the Cree worldview, in contemporary time, place, with a practice that incorporates Indigenous languages, audio, video, virtual reality, the olfactory, music, and audience user participation to create immersive environments towards radical inclusion. That is a mouthful. She does an awful lot of varied work, and I have been incredibly fortunate and honored to have been working with such a vibrant individual over these past 4 years. She has been incredibly generous with her time to work on this project, and it is sincerely my hope that everything that we have been working on here is beneficial to her own continued work moving forward, and ensuring that this continues to live. So this all falls, everything that I'm talking about today falls in the Futures of Digital Media Histories umbrella. So as Heather mentioned, I'm the emulator developer for this project. And we began in 2023 with Wicked Ideas, which was a university-funded proof of concept focusing on one particular work by Cheryl Lee Rondell. This project was a collaboration of the Vulnerable Media Lab at Queen's University, which includes Susan Lord and Hilary J., Jen Kennedy from the Department of Art Conservation and Art History, and Danuta Searhouse at the Agnes Etherington Art Center, among many others at the university. We had a really diverse group starting work on Wicked Ideas from computer science as well, among other places. So we held forums and workshops related to this problem of ensuring that digital media, and in this particular case, net art, would survive into the future. So Vancouver Songlines was the first work that we started, and it's also known as Nigamon Ochiaski in Cree, or Songs Because of the Land, created in 2008 by Cheryl Lee Rondell. This was an Adobe Flash-based work. And for those of you who are familiar with Flash, it was shut down in 2020 due to various security issues that Adobe faced, and that users who had Adobe Flash installed on their computers faced, because it allowed someone to potentially break into their computer. So yes, that's a significant problem. However, multiple artists, multiple creators had been using Flash for 20 years. And all of a sudden, their content was gone. It could no longer be accessed by newer computers because Flash was effectively scrubbed from the internet. So those content creators with money could migrate their platforms to HTML. Sorry, I'm going to go back 1 second. HTML5, or others with less money could only sit back and watch their works disappear. So most artists, of course, typically work grant to grant or commission to commission, and most often their work focuses on new works. So they're not necessarily going back to older works that they've created to revive them in some way, shape, or form, and that's a challenge for sure. So I'm going to take you through a quick journey of what we did with Nigomon Ochiaski and show you the sort of steps that I took to figure this out. This was all experimental. I had no idea what I was doing necessarily. I'd worked with Flash in the past, but this was reviving Flash in some way. So a lot of the work that we needed to do with Flash, I found the forums related to gaming were the most helpful. That everyone who has played Flash-based games wanted to play them again, so they wanted to bring them back. So I started with Firefox Flash Emulator to begin, and it's kind of gave me a picture of what was there, because if you go to vancouversonglines.ca, which still exists on the internet, it was a black page, just blank. There was nothing there because the entire thing is based in Flash. So this gave me a screen that I could actually see, so I could start with that point. And there are other Flash emulators out there. This is based in Ruffle.rs, which is an open source project, which is trying to revive Flash-based works. They've been successful in some cases, been less successful in other cases. This was only partially successful, so we needed to try something else. So we tried the first attempt at a virtual machine, which is what I've worked with virtual machines over a number of years. And I use them for different parts of digital preservation. In this case, it was a Windows 7 virtual machine with Flash installed. Of course, it couldn't find it, so we had to move on to back to a modern operating system with other types of software. And it could only make it to maybe the first page and a little bit further. And then finally try a different piece of software. There's a lot of software out there because a lot of people want to solve this problem. And this one got me nowhere as well until we went back to another VM and it came closer. Now, if I was using Flash player, Flash projector in Windows 10, I got about as far as I did on a previous version. But it wasn't until I tried Windows XP or Windows 7 with a Flash projector in 32-bit, so very specific, to try to use this software to be able to see all of the elements of this Flash website. And it finally worked. I was very happy with this. So part of the issue, though, as I mentioned earlier, is that Adobe has tried to scrub all Flash products from the internet because it's a security issue. The Internet Archive software collection has a lot of these different pieces. So the Flash player I was able to download from the Internet Archive software collection. I went back a few years later and it had already disappeared because Adobe had said, please take that down. So users keep on putting it up, but Adobe keeps on trying to take it down. Well, I needed it for this work, so it was really challenging. However, the other problem is when you're running a virtual machine with an older version of Windows, Windows still requires licenses. You have to have a license to be able to install Windows onto your computer. Otherwise, you'll get all these pop-ups constantly saying, you are no longer using a good version of Windows. This is unauthorized, and it's very annoying. And if you want to use it for people to view the works, you don't want them to constantly see that this is a counterfeit piece of software. So licenses for Windows operating systems are kind of worth their weight in gold. If you have older versions of Windows, hold on to your licenses. It's really important. So I will give you a quick view of what this work looked like when it finally was working. So just giving you a little bit of information about the work. Cheryl wandered the streets of Vancouver. She was commissioned by Grunt Gallery, and she walked around with a recorder, and she recorded interviews that she had with largely unhoused population in Vancouver who were primarily Indigenous that she was speaking with, street sounds. And then she would improvise songs as she was walking, and she would record and upload all of those to a server to be played at random based on tags of core values selected from the TP polls from an earlier page. So the values were happiness. The values were, I can't remember all of the values off the top of my head. But anyway, each one of these, the lines that you see on the tent poles or part of the songs And then the embers that come from the fire create all of these soundscapes that you could adjust and move around, turn on and turn off, and create your own unique songs because of the land. So a very interactive work, and Flash was really integral to how this worked. So we'll move on to beyond this, the stage 2 of Futures of Digital Media Histories started with Emulator Library for Media Arts, or ELMA. This is a 2-year Canada Council for the Arts funded project that we are currently working on. We finished the first year of it, and we have 1 more year to continue. This is the collaboration. The partners that we had in Wicked Ideas continued on with this one. And we were able to hire on a former student in game emulation, Logan Thenis, to help with this larger project as well. So we still had access to some of the live sites that share. This is, again, all based on Cheryl's works. So we had access to some of the live sites, while other ones were only available from previous backups. So we had to reconstruct them. We couldn't necessarily see what they were. So obviously we want to revive these works, but we also want to document all of the elements of them, because this is in part, this is led in mostly by our art historian, Jennifer Kennedy, who also wants to view these works critically, and she can't see them. So this is a really, really big problem for anyone studying modern or contemporary net art or digital art, is the loss of these works. So the works that we worked on were Horizon 017 Tel, Treaty Card, and Indian Spam. These all ran on slightly different technology with an underlying LAMP or Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP server core. And I'll get into each one of these individually to tell you a little bit more about them. So Treaty Card was the first one that we worked on. About this one, Cheryl writes that this site is an attempt to redress current relations between natives and non-natives by re-examining the intent, issue, and details of the Canadian government's Certificate of Indian Status, which is more commonly known as Treaty Card in mainly the plains on the land base now called Canada. When the treaties were signed, it was between a chief on behalf of the people and a representative of the queen on behalf of her people. Since the treaties were made between at least 2 parties, then both should have a card. So this is a server environment that runs on forms. Basically, you enter your information. You can enter lies as well. It doesn't have to be real information. And it will produce a card for you to print out. And then when she had it exhibited in the galleries, she had a laminator beside it. So you could laminate your card, and you would be able to have your own treaty card. Of course, the Canadian flag is upside down on it, and she has her own spin on absolutely everything in here. What's fascinating about Cheryl is that she infuses a lot of her work with a lot of humor as well. She doesn't take herself seriously at all. So it's really spectacular. So this, when we had access to the modern server environment, you can go to treatycard.ca today. And most of it's not really working. There's a lot of broken links. Things don't quite do what they're supposed to do. So Cheryl gave us access to the back end. We could go in. I could export the MySQL database, which was really vital to all of this working, and take the original PHP. Now, this was older PHP files. So I think it was written in 5.6, and we are now at 8 point something. And I created a modern server environment in a virtual machine to try to run all of this as a local server, so that you could just see it on a local browser as well. So off the internet, you could have this completely offline, but still be able to interact and see the work. And this was a bit challenging in that I'd have to recreate an older server environment to get the original PHP files to work, which I did later. But the first time I tried this out, I said, okay, well, what can we do to update this? So from a digital preservation standpoint, I don't want to touch the files necessarily. From a digital conservation standpoint, maybe I do. So I didn't mind throwing these PHP files into GitHub and to the AI Copilot and say, convert these to PHP 8. I had this site up and working within less than an hour based on that. So we had brand new PHP and the entire site worked top to bottom. And we confirmed this by sitting down with Cheryl and saying, does this work the way you expect it to? Is this everything? And she said, yes, that's perfect. That's exactly how it's supposed to work. Great. So job done. We managed to do that. So AI has been useful, and especially for coding, to be able to upgrade, because it tells you too, what is it, if you ask it, what is it that it's changing in all of these files. So it says, I changed this to this. This is an old command that is no longer used in modern PHP. So instead, we are asking it to do this. It was not a challenging work necessarily. This was a very basic one that Cheryl had created, because it was one of the very first ones that she had ever done using PHP and MySQL. So it was not, like I said, by no means complicated. It was really the vision that was important here. But it does have requirements. It requires a webcam to take a picture of you. So in a gallery environment, it requires a printer, and it requires possibly a laminator if you want to laminate your card as well. So some extra things beyond the digital still exist. So on to the next one, Horizon 017 Tell. So this was an online set of issues that was produced by the video artist Sarah Diamond, and she invited artists for each one of the issues. And this is issue 17, Tell, Aboriginal Story in Digital Media, that Cheryl was the created and then also curated, because she collected works from other Indigenous artists to include within this website. We did not have access to the website. The website had been gone for possibly up to 10 years by this point, but we did have a CD-ROM that had the HTML and Flash versions on it. So we don't know what it was supposed to look like originally, but when we were able to put it into the same viewer that we had for Vancouver Songlines, we could see all the elements that were working. We could also see the elements that weren't working, because in a Flash viewer, this was a hybrid HTML and Flash site. So if you clicked on an HTML link within the Flash viewer, nothing would happen. It would just be a dead link. And it was at this point that my development partner, Logan, had mentioned something about a browser called Y8, which was created on Ruffle, as I'd mentioned before, the Ruffle Flash viewer online. And if we put this on a server environment and then called it up in Y8, which we were able to do, absolutely everything worked. So all of the links from the HTML could go somewhere else. If they were dead originally, you're always going to have a problem with that. If wherever it's linking to is not there, it's a bit of a challenge. And you can't go into Flash necessarily, the Flash files, and change those to a modern link. So, and there were also pop-up videos that wouldn't work in the Flash viewer. So thankfully, this allowed us to get the pop-up views as well. So the last one that we worked on was indianspam.com. And this, from the opening introduction to this, Lisa Myers wrote about the work that Lirondelle reclaims and reappropriates a common budget-conscious food item, one that was a government-issued ration of commodity food sent to reservations, as a strategy not only emphasizing the act of making the best use of what resources are present, but also employing the Indian spam cookbook as an email listserv. So Lirondelle embraces the unwanted spam email as a strategy to encourage communication. So this was a multi-layered website that had a lot of meaning, and it was just also very fun. Like there's a lot of playfulness in the website too. So the site was no longer available. However, the Internet Archive showed was what the site looked like. So we could actually try to determine, when we brought it back, did it look similar to what it was supposed to be? The domain name was also lost at one point in time. So she couldn't even really bring it back in its original incarnation. So I managed to, when I was looking at the treaty card server, she had it on the same server as that. And I just hunting around, managed to find that it still existed there. So got the credentials for it. I needed to get in to get the MySQL database, because the backup didn't have the complete database backup either. And that was a core piece to this particular work. So we needed to get the intact database to put into our virtual machine to be able to revive the work and actually see everything that was in it and have all the pieces work as originally intended. So our timeline sped up. significantly when Cheryl discovered that, or was asked by the Banff Center to have a retrospective of her works. And the four works that we had been working on, from Vancouver Songlines all the way to Indian Spam, were all going to be included in this exhibit, which starts next week. So we had to make sure that these were ready to go. So we were fairly confident that we were on the right track. We had a couple of moments when we had to try to speed up on some other things. But then we had to work with within the technical hurdles of what can a small gallery reasonably display, and how is it that they can set this up without having to come back to a developer or go to the artist constantly to try to figure out why something is not working. So the gallery actually sent me some Mac Minis to install all of the virtual machines onto. And then I discovered that the virtual machine software I'm using, Oracle Virtual Machine, VirtualBox, doesn't have the same communication pathways on each machine. So we had to revisit how we made sure that the server was talking to a browser. And then when I talked about Treaty Card, we then realized that it was a challenge to get all of the information, like the printer or a webcam to work. You can't use it in a Windows 7 browser. You have to have it on a modern browser. So we had to make some alterations to that too. So our next steps, of course, are to explore emulation as a potential strategy, and we have spoken with emulators, with Eric Kaltman at University of Alberta, who has run Easy in the United States, and then the Game and Interactive Software Scholarship Toolkit. Produce additional virtual machines that are generic for different technologies, and then extensive documentation. So I'll just give you a quick sample of this because I don't want to get into John's time too much. But this is just a little bit from Cheryl. And I'll move forward a little bit on this.
The school at Morley First Nation, the Stony Reserve, and the principal made drawings, and new stories, and he was also
fast forward a bit too.
And so
this is in Nakota.
Story. So we'll just go through and.
So I'll pause this for a moment. Just that what was really important about this particular work is that the Nakota language had never been on the internet before this project came out. And so the principal of Morley, Dwayne Mark, was a fluent Nakota speaker, and he, according to Cheryl, was just so thrilled to be able to hear his own language out there in the world beyond what was already in the website. And of course, this website disappeared. So then it was there and then not there anymore. So this is part of the reason why we're so interested in seeing these works revived, because they are stories that belong to communities that are, in some cases, so small or so just not available to everyone else. So this is very important to them as well, and just to the world culture in general. And we'll move forward to just final future issues. We still have issues with, of course, source files and media, and virtualized solutions will face their own obsolescence. So this is a challenge. Lost expertise. As I've noticed going into some of the older technology, I've run servers before. I've created things like I don't have any expertise in Flash necessarily. People who have expertise in Flash are disappearing because you're not making Flash anymore. So going back to try to fix some of these issues is challenging. Older middleware technologies within a server is challenging to, if you don't know what I've spoken with developers from these websites and they can't remember what they did 15 years ago. I don't remember what I did last year, which is I try to journal absolutely everything I do so I can remember for myself what to do. And then sustained funding, right? Like you have to make sure that there's some way that you can continue this work going forward and make sure that it doesn't disappear again into the future. So just some resources. I just wanted to let you know that Lima and Rhizome have done similar work. Lima in the Netherlands, Rhizome, of course, in the United States. Some of the documentation strategies that we've used have been informed by DOCAM, which was run out of the Daniel Langlois Foundation in Montreal. And I just wish to thank you very much for listening.
Fantastic, Jeremy. That was fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing your work. I've been really looking forward to hearing from you, and that was excellent. And you're appropriately getting many clapping hands coming up here. Um, so we will move to our next speaker, who is John Durno. John is the head of digital infrastructure at the University of Victoria Libraries in Canada, where, among other things, he curates the library's historic computing collection and oversees data recovery and digital preservation activities. So, welcome, John.
Thanks very much, Heather and Maria Paula. I'm very impressed by your work there, Jeremy, and I think there's some interesting overlaps here. Um, uh, Before as I begin, I just want to say that like Heather, I would like to affirm that I acknowledge and respect the Lekwungen, Songhees, and Kusepsum peoples on whose territory the University of Victoria stands, and from where I am presenting today, and Lekwungen and Wasanic peoples whose historical relationships with the land continue to this day. And now I will attempt to share my screen. And hopefully you're all now seeing my presentation. Um, Over the past 11 years or so, I have led a project to recover and restore over 60 artworks made by Canadian artists back in the early to mid 1980s in the uniquely Canadian medium of Teledon Videotex. And it posed some interesting challenges. Sometime around the turn of the millennium, say the year 2000, in a crowdsourced compendium of obsolete media called the Dead Media Project, artist Jeffrey Shea pronounced Teledon art to be dead as a doornail. Uh, as he explained, the artworks still exist on 8-inch floppy disks somewhere in a filing cabinet, but as far as I know, there is not an existing operating decoder which can display them. In making this assessment, Shea identified the central problem any attempt to restore Teledon art would have to face. Deeply enmeshed in the technologies of early 1980s computing, Teledon required an obscure and specialized device called a Teledon decoder to interpret Teledon graphics code and render the results on a display. Even in the year 2000, only 15 years after the Teledon project formally ended, few such devices still existed in an operable state. Teledon's failure to gain widespread adoption in the marketplace had the downstream effect of consigning an entire class of digital objects to apparent oblivion. Launched with much fanfare in 1978, Teledon began as a project of the Canadian Federal Department of Communications to develop consumer-facing interactive information networks. It was to be the Canadian version of Videotex, pre-internet technology that evolved out of Viewdata, which was a service developed by British Telecom, and which would achieve its greatest success in France's Minitel network. The Canadian variant of Videotex differed from its competitors most notably in its capacity to transmit much more sophisticated graphics using a highly compact vector encoding well suited to the limited bandwidth and storage capacities available at the time. In the 7 years of Teledon's existence, over 40 field trials were conducted, public and private investment approached $300 million, several attempts to commercialize the technology were made, and it became the foundation for a North American videotex protocol called NAPLIPS, the North American Presentation Level Protocol Syntax, just rolls trippingly off the tongue, after AT&T and other US-based entities got involved. Although Teledon was initially conceived in the context of large-scale videotex deployments, it could be presented in other ways. Had it been limited exclusively to networked videotex, it would have remained entirely in the realm of big government and large corporations, the only organizations with resources sufficient to underwrite the mainframe computers, databases, and telecommunications infrastructure required to run videotex networks. The ability of Teledon to operate outside the context of large-scale videotex opened the door to a wide range of participants, from small businesses to educators to artists. And it is with the latter group that this presentation is primarily concerned, in particular the artists affiliated with an artist-run center called Toronto Community Videotex, or TCV for short. Building on the success of Bill Perry's project Teledon at Trinity Square Video, which happened around 1981 and 1982, TCV was founded in 1983 to provide access to Teledon equipment to artists and run education and outreach programs supporting the production of Teledon artwork. Now, Teledon was a protocol, not a proprietary technology. Teledon equipment was manufactured by several different companies in different form factors. However, in its most characteristic early form, the system required to view Teledon graphics consisted of a CRT monitor, a keypad similar to a TV remote, a Teledon decoder box, and a modem connecting the system to a remote server transmitting Teledon graphics in response to user input. Although Teledon viewing equipment was fairly expensive, it was at least intended to be affordable by the average middle-class Canadian consumer. The same, however, could not be said for the systems required to create Teledon graphics. For example, the Norpak IPS-2 was a workstation the size and form factor of an office desk with dual monitors, keyboard, drawing tablet, and expensive mini-computer built right into it. It cost approximately $25,000, which in 1981 was not far off the annual income of the average Canadian household. Consequently, artists wanting to create Teledon graphics could do so only under the auspices of an organization, whether that was a university research lab, a corporation, or an artist-run center like TCV. Although there were other centers of Teledon art production in Canada, TCV was by far the most important. Over the years, hundreds of artists would attend its workshops, dozens of whom went on to create notable Teledon artworks. Artists affiliated with TCV exhibited their work widely in galleries as well as in alternative venues such as the Bell Vista Teledon Field Trials, theatrical events, broadcast television, and Expo 86 in Vancouver, and internationally at the 1983 Biennale de Sao Paulo. A group exhibition was prepared for the 1986 Venice Biennale, however, it could not proceed as planned due to technical difficulties, and analog surrogates were shown in place of the Teledon artworks. Technical difficulties is a common refrain among the artists who were affiliated with Teledon back in the day. By the mid-1980s, the Teledon fever that had gripped the Canadian telecommunications marketplace earlier in the decade had waned, as efforts to market Teledon systems and services repeatedly failed to achieve profitability. Public funding for Teledon was withdrawn in March of 1985, leaving further development entirely in the hands of the private sector. Going forward, the term Teledon fell into disuse, except as a historical reference, replaced by the initialism NAPLIPS, referencing the International Encoding Standard. NAPLIP's art production outlasted the federally funded Teledon project by a couple of years, but by 1987 it was clear that Videotex services in North America had come and gone without making much of an impact, and the technologies that had seemed so advanced a few years earlier were now being eclipsed by new computing systems entering the consumer mainstream. TCV expanded its repertoire to include Macs and Amigas, implemented a Unix-based dial-up network called Matrix, and changed its name to Interaccess. In the years following, Interaccess's Teledon equipment fell into disuse, obsolesced, and was eventually deaccessioned, and their collection of Teledon artworks was boxed up and moved into their archives. Such was the state of affairs in the year 2000, when Jeffrey Shea declared Teledon art to be dead as a doornail due to the absence of functioning Teledon decoders. This persisted at least until 2015, when Shea's observations were echoed by almost verbatim by an author named Jordan Pearson. The only remnants that exist today are photos and video of the original interactive pieces, Pearson wrote in The Original Net Artists, which is an article accompanying a short video documentary on Teledon art produced by Vice Media's online magazine, Motherboard. Coincidentally, 2015 is the year I began a project to restore the Teledon artworks of the late Glenn Howarth that had formed part of a donation to the University of Victoria archives a few years earlier. A project that would later expand to include all of the artists represented in the archives of TCV. As I began work on the project, it became clear that solving the missing decoder problem would in fact be a significant challenge. The functional requirements for NAPLIPS are extensively documented, such that one could, in theory, create a modern standards-compliant Teledon decoder by implementing those requirements in code. This strategy was considered, but ultimately rejected due to the complexity of the protocol. The functional requirements for a NAPLIPS decoder run to 175 pages of dense technical prose. Creating a new Teledon decoder was beyond the resources available to this project. Another option would have been to utilize period hardware. Although Teledon computing hardware is extremely rare in the present day, in the 11 years since beginning our project, we have been able to acquire 2 hardware decoders. And while the output from these decoders provided a valuable reference point for our restoration work, a 40-year-old computing hardware cannot be relied upon to provide public access, as in a museum or gallery, or as more than a temporary solution in an archival context, as sooner or later it will permanently fail. As the goal of our project was long-term preservation and access for these artworks, emulation, the reconstruction of computing hardware and software, which Jeremy did a very good job of describing, was really the only viable solution here. As writing our own Teledon decoder was not feasible, it would be necessary to locate a software decoder and combine it with other software components to create a modern Teledon display system. Teledon hardware and software evolved throughout the 1980s, taking advantage of rapid improvements in microcomputing technology to bring down costs. By 1984, it was possible to build an interactive NAPLIPS display that consisted of an IBM PC equipped with a Teledon graphics card, running locally installed database software to sequence graphics in response to user input. The ill-fated 1986 Venice Biennale Teledon exhibition was designed to run on just such a system. By 1988, it was possible to implement an entire NAPLIPS system in software on an IBM PC, obviating the need for specialized hardware altogether. This was the strategy employed by Prodigy Online, an IBM Sears joint venture that may fairly be described as the only successful mass-market deployment of a NAPLIPS-based information service. At its peak in the early 1990s, Prodigy boasted more than 1 million subscribers. In order to render its NAPLIPS-based interface, the Prodigy client program included a NAPLIPS decoder implemented entirely in software. Called the MicroStar Virtual Device Interface, or MVDI, it was developed by a small company owned and operated by Peter Jordan and family based in Ottawa, Canada. However, the Prodigy client was not suitable for our project, having been developed for a different use case. MVDI was tightly integrated with the Prodigy software, making it impossible to repurpose in that form. However, in a stroke of what can only be described as remarkable good fortune, in 2018, our project received from the Jordan family a donation of the only known copy of MicroStar's MVDI development kit, consisting of NAPLIP software libraries on 4 5¼ inch floppy disks and a binder of associated documentation. The kit was the foundation upon which we wrote a software program capable of sequencing and displaying NAPLIPS graphics in a manner replicating a PC-based Teledon system from the mid-1980s. Running software written for a mid-80s IBM PC on a modern computer requires a PC emulator, and fortunately, work done in the video game preservation space ensures there is no shortage of software capable of emulating a DOS-based IBM PC from that era. The open source DOSBox emulator proved best suited to our project requirements. DOSBox is highly configurable, with several affordances that are key to the success of our project. One such is the ability to control the speed of the emulation by setting the number of processing cycles per second. One of the defining characteristics of 1980s Teledon art was the speed at which it rendered. Shapes, lines, and text drew slowly and perceptibly in a succession of overlays as the work emerged on the monitor. Artists viewed this as part of the expressive aspect of the medium and made use of it in various ways. However, this characteristic was not intrinsic to the Teledon protocol. It was simply a follow-on effect of the limited processing capabilities and data transmission rates of early 1980s computing hardware. Setting DOSBox to run at the speed of a first-generation IBM PC was sufficient to reproduce this characteristic of early Teledon. Although our display system is fully NAPLIPS compliant, it does not perfectly emulate any of the Teledon displays used by artists in the early 1980s. As MVDI was designed to output to a VGA computer monitor, its 640 by 480 screen resolution is higher than the characteristic resolution of a hardware decoder displaying Teledon on a CRT TV. Display timings are also imperfect. When viewed alongside the output of a hardware decoder, as seen here, it is apparent that our decoder draws text somewhat faster and polygons somewhat more slowly. Ultimately, whether these differences are important or incidental must be left to the artists in cases where they are available to evaluate our restorations of their work. We have not yet encountered a case where a restoration was deemed unacceptable by the artist. We'll just let the emulation play out. You can see that although the restoration on the right was sort of had leapfrogged the restoration on the left, which are the original work on the left. By the time the emulation plays out, the two are this kind of situation is reversed, and that just has to do with the slight differences in timings between the various display elements. Our modern interactive Teledon display system powered an exhibition of Teledon art held at Interaccess in Toronto in the autumn of 2023. Curated by Shauna Doherty, the exhibition commemorated Interaccess' 40th anniversary. 4 emulated Teledon terminals each presented a different selection of artworks. The CRT displays closely replicated the aesthetics of vintage 1980s Teledon hardware. Hidden behind the plinths, inexpensive repurposed second-hand Linux thin clients ran the presentations. As the Teledon artworks expected different input options than are standard on modern devices, it was necessary to create custom keypads to go with our home-built displays. A DOSBox's key mapping utility was essential to making this work. A web exhibition was developed in conjunction with a gallery exhibition funded by Digital Museums Canada. It opened earlier this year and runs until April of 2023. The exhibition includes 17 Teledon artworks, 13 of which are restorations, some of which are period videos, as well as a selection of historical and contextual material. The restorations are presented in the form of video recordings, and that was because although it would have been possible to showcase fully interactive emulations, non-interactive video recordings better addressed the accessibility requirements for the show. And just going to do a quick live demo here. It's live demo time here as the artist Nell Tenhalf's website. I worked with Nell to restore some of her artworks, and this is one of her very early works. It's called Us and or Them. I could make it full screen, but then that would just play havoc with the Zoom sharing, so I'm just going to leave it kind of looking small there. And you can see the DOSBox emulator booting. One of the nice features of DOSBox, again, is because it is just so widely used. It's been ported it's been ported to run on the web. There are JavaScript libraries available for interacting with it. So you can see these on-screen controls. They're actually outside the emulation, but they're sitting in for that custom keypad that I mentioned earlier. And so you can jump from section to section in a sort of an interactive a recreation of these sort of interactive capabilities of the work. Go back to section 1 here, and you can largely just kind of page through it sequentially. You can also see one of the characteristics of this is that only parts of the screen are redrawing as you move through the display. Again, another characteristic of Teledon art. It's very different. It's not a succession of singular graphics files. It's very much kind of a byte stream protocol. Yes, blinking text too. So it's all kinds of wonderful affordances there. It's quite challenging to recreate some of these little features. Let's see. Yeah, so we're coming up on the end of the presentation here. I'll just for fun, I'll show you. It's actually possible to hack the display. You can hit Control C and you can actually go directly into the on-screen emulator, see what files are associated with the presentation and so on. Look at some of the database that's included with the and then anyway, it's kind of fun. This kind of emulation just sort of seems like magic to me. Like I remember when it took like 2 minutes to boot this up on when you're running on hardware. So the fact that it just runs so well in a web browser is just phenomenal. Anyway, um, move along. Jump back to back to the presentation here. Yeah, so just the next and hopefully last stage of the project will be to organize and to document the wealth of material collected over the past 11 years, along with software and steps required to display Teledyne graphics on modern computers, and accession all of it into the University of Victoria archives. The hope being, of course, that should anyone want to view these works 50 or 100 years from now, they will not have to reinvent the wheel, and that what we're packaging up now will at least provide the means to either view the works or at least a solid basis to start from if you have to reconstruct some of the work that we're doing now. I hope to have that completed by the end of 2027. And then just some acknowledgments that although I led the project, it's benefited from help from all kinds of folks. Too many to list on a slide, but that's kind of a start for some of the folks who've made some really substantial contributions to the project. So I will stop sharing now, and hopefully we have some time left for questions. Maybe I can figure out how to stop sharing.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, John. That's fantastic. You've got the floating, clapping hands coming your way now.
There we go. Oh, nice.
Uh, Thank you so much. That was fascinating. And every time I hear you speak, I learn something new. So thanks so much for sharing your project with us. Um, so I'm just looking at the Q&A box, and there was a question that we had where um, there was a question about emulation versus long-term preservation. And Jeremy, I see you're already nodding. So do you want to speak to that?
Oh, this is a fun problem, and I've barely scratched the surface on this one yet. Yeah, I think I know I was taking a look at the questions too, and there was preserving the artworks versus the emulation. Yes,
Hmm.
the artworks as they stand, my hope would be that the backups give us a good starting point, but it's not the end point. So, as digital preservation, of course, involves a combination potentially of emulation, migration, or and then also maintaining the original files as they are, so that you can see what they're supposed to do. Um, as I mentioned at the end of my presentation, the longevity of an emulated environment or a virtual environment is also a problem we are going to have to deal with because the technology on which these emulators or virtual machines is built, it will change. And I've already encountered it with older virtual machines that I've produced that don't work well in a more modern environment because certain features have been turned off, or it just there were security issues again, similar to with Flash. So unfortunately, digital preservation is not like we'd like to think that we have saved something for 100 years and that in 100 years time you can see it, but it really is a almost year by year, maybe 2, 3, 4 year by 4 year problem where you have to revisit it constantly. And yeah, it's just an issue because I don't know if we have enough time for that. So yes, absolutely, there is no end game in preservation. It's constant. Yeah.
Hmm. John, would you like to add anything to that or?
Well, just yeah, I mean Trevor Owen's observation that nothing is ever preserved. It's just few things that are being preserved. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I think there are there are ways you can sort of think about approaching it. You're always
Hmm.
depending on the work of other people. I mean, there's like the DOSBox emulator, for example, is absolutely core to what we did. It's really nice that that's the emulator that worked in this context because it's really widespread. It's got people who are, it's an open source project, so the source code is available. You can preserve the source code along with the actual emulator itself. People are working on it to migrate that forward because there are companies who depend upon it to sell you old DOS games, basically, if you buy, so but who knows, 50 years from now, what the state of that project, what is going to be. Um,
Hmm.
it's my counterpart 50 or 100 years from now will probably have some significant work to do, but at least we can get the files and the original kind of artworks prepared for them. We can maybe make some record like video recordings, which would likely be very helpful in doing a kind of restoration of this work. So there's things we can do, but yeah, it's like putting messages in bottles and yeah.
Great, thank you. Um, Two questions that are kind of similar are just like, what do we do now in communicating with practicing artists to build in consideration for long-term preservation?
I do have, so part of it is because we've been engaged in extensive documentation with Cheryl Arundel on her artwork, and she has been very receptive to having conversations about these. And in fact, at some points too, she's considered it. It's like visiting an old friend, where you sit down and see this thing for the first time in 5 or 10 years, and you remember things of like, oh, that's right. This is why I made this choice or this choice, and this is how it was intended to work. But in fact, this part never really worked well.
Mm.
So knowing all of that and having it recorded is really important. But we don't always have that opportunity. And some artists may be reticent to actually speak about their work. Some artists might want to see it die. They want to see an endpoint to whatever works they have. Now, I would argue that galleries are probably very loath to see that, especially if they're the ones who have purchased these works, that they want to see them infinitely usable in the future to be able to exhibit. And there's a bit of a push and pull to that, as we've discovered. And we've had many conversations about this, because the conversations are not just technical, it's ethical, it's respect for the artist's wishes, respect for ensuring that the works are represented as close to the original as possible. Or if that, in some cases too, many artists will revisit a work and then change it. In fact, the treaty card one, there's 3 iterations of it. She had one version on a server that she completely changed and created a new one, changed it again, and now she's considering changing it again. So, like, a variation for every couple of years can happen as well. So, yeah, I don't know. That's, yeah, sort of my point of view.
John, did you want to add anything to that? I think,
Um, I,
you
you
know,
know,
you've,
yeah, it's I mean the focus of my restoration work has been on a very discrete sort of set of problems that were you kind of rooted in the 1980s. I think one of the real challenges going forward is going to be, art like net art that pulls in resources from all over the place, right? Like it's just at some point preserving that becomes almost impossible because it's it's calling to resources that aren't there anymore and will never be there again. So in those cases, I think, making recordings of the work while it's still in a sort of active state is probably the only way you're really going to get any aspect of that preserved. And in a sense, it becomes like preserving a performance rather than preserving the work itself, which is basically designed to self-destruct. Um,
mm,
so yeah.
great. Thank you. I think both these projects are really interesting examples of uh, archivists and libraries and galleries actually working in collaboration. Um, and you've both worked with galleries to exhibit the works. What's the scenario look like if it's like a researcher coming to a reading room of an archives or a library?
Yeah, I think in some ways I would almost treat it in the same fashion because we have these virtual machines ready. Managing that over time can be challenging. I mean, right now, in fact, I have a virtual machine running. I was going to, if I had time, I was going to show you one of the works as it's currently running, the way that it would work in the gallery setting. So it's a simple server that's running in the background. You go to the browser and you can actually see and interact with the work. And we could do the same thing. So I would anticipate we could foreseeably do that into the future. Um, but then you have to manage those objects as well. And they can be somewhat large because it's an entire server environment that you're managing. So it's much bigger than just a couple of files that relate to something. So again, maybe it's back to the evidence of the objects of the video documentation that could provide enough information to a researcher. Yeah, I guess every researcher is slightly different. You probably go with what is probably the most common for what you can preserve, and then beyond that, it's like, okay, well, this is a really special request, and let's see if we can make that work for you.
Great. Thank
I,
you.
I probably
Not
don't have
easy
anything more to say to that.
solutions. Yeah, yeah. And we are at time. There's lots more questions and more technical questions that are in the Q&A box, but unfortunately, we need to wrap up. So my thanks both to both of you, to Jeremy and to John for your excellent presentations. They were incredible. Thank you all who joined us today. We are really thrilled to be able to share the work that you're doing with a group of interested people. Um, and my thanks also to Maria Paula and Clemence, who helped us promote and from a technical side run this workshop. So thank you very much to everyone for your time today, and have a good day.